Hi everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're breaking open the TCP, looking at the internals. We're going to check out the regulator. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and the springs, and then I'm going to talk about this pin in your bolt.
I'm going to talk to you about a few things on the Pepperball TCP. I've already started taking it apart here, and that'll help with our discussion today. And one of the first things you probably notice is this lower portion of the upper piece. When you separate it, this is actually attached with screws, and if you can purchase this separately from Rockstar Tactical as a black piece, or you can take the yellow piece that came with it and you can dye it with RIT dye, and that's something that would work really well, and it's going to look very much like factory. So either way that you do it, you can convert it this way or that way. I keep this one because I may at some point find that I like the yellow again, and so it's nice to have that option. You certainly can never take a black one or a brown one or a tan one and make it yellow. It would be very hard to do. So I've sort of held on to my yellow one for now, and it's good to have as a backup. If you ever over tighten these screws, theoretically you could crack your piece. These are not the strongest plastic, and so you just have to be careful with that. But this, usually after you've taken it apart, this just goes over to the side, and I keep my screws in a bin. I have them basically separated in a bin, and I put this in with them, and it helps me stay organized. And so most of what we're going to be looking at is in this piece, and I've already taken out my Grimberg barrel from the previous video in the shooting, and I've got that, and I put it over to the side. And this is where it's all at. This is where we really want to focus our attention on, looking at making sure everything's okay, making sure everything is lubed and oiled, and we can pull out our spring here. And I'm running a VKS spring, so if you compare this to the stock TCP spring, you'll notice there's a difference. Now this is your stock spring that comes with the TCP, and to my knowledge this is identical to the FSC spring. I've purchased FSC springs, and I don't see any differences. They're more than sufficient for most uses, and I think for a lot of folks they work really well. But you'll notice that if you compare it to the VKS spring, there are fewer coils in the VKS spring, and if you look really close, you can tell even by eye that it's a little thicker, and that just makes it stronger. It can withstand more force, and it really does a better job at getting the bolt reset, whereas this one is a little bit longer and it's going to wear faster, and it has a little bit more potential to wobble or to buckle, whereas this one's a little shorter and just a much better spring overall. And so that's what I'm running in the TCP these days after the upgrade. So that's one of the first things that I think will really help with increasing the number of shots that you get at higher power. So now we're going to take off the regulator, and that's really where we really get to the most important parts. And be careful with this tiny little O-ring, which is on your trigger. Make sure you keep that in a safe place when you remove that. And that gives you a little bit more room on this screw to take it off. I usually just give it a little twist first to loosen it, and then I come off this way. And there's only one screw on the TCP regulator, which I don't have an FSC, so I assume it's exactly the same. And the regulator comes off that way. And I used to have a problem with these two little fork screws here and here. They used to unscrew after high power shooting, but you can see now they're seated very well. and they're staying very tight because I used some red Loctite on them, and I haven't had any trouble with those backing out. And so this piece is what has your bolt, and we'll first set this aside, and we'll just look at the regulator, because this is really, I think, the important part of the TCP that really is the brains of the TCP. This controls your airflow. It controls your velocity setting, which is on this screw in the back here. By putting more force on the spring and the ball valve that's inside this regulator, you're actually creating more air pressure. You're essentially not allowing venting of air. More air is diverted into the air chamber, and the air chamber then is pushing that forward, so you're getting more velocity. So I don't intend to go through great detail on this today, but I do think I'll spend some time on a future video to try to understand or try to explain the airflow a little bit better. And I think that's an important thing to sort of have a basic understanding. Mine is in pretty good shape. I don't see a lot of wear, but I go through and I clean this, and I check all of the springs and make sure that they're nice and in good shape. You can see that I have a shiny spring here. This is the VKS spring that I think is called the sear spring, and this one is the one that I replaced. The previous one is sort of in here, and that's it right here. Let's get it out. The previous one right here. So these are much weaker, and I'd say if you're going to change anything in here, get the VKS spring and replace it. That's really going to give you a nice effect on your regulator function. And I also doubled up this spring. This is something, a lot of these upgrades you can see more detail on if you go to the PSI Less Lethal Defense channel. Henry's done a lot of work on this. Doubling up this spring, shimming right here is also a big help, and I'm using a piece of a paper safety pin that I cut and I put on the bottom of the spring, and that's working really well. And then of course I use the PRV delete kit from Daniel Sterling at Sterling Self Defense. I got that comes with the VKS spring here, as well as the VKS bolt spring, and it also includes a spring pad for the regulator, which is what is inside of here. And inside here, that regulator spring pad, he has deleted the PRV, and I think that's the biggest advantage that you get with my current setup compared to what you would get from a stock regulator. And so each of those are important, and they synergistically work together to get more air, to get you more power, but also to not waste air. And that's really where I think the advantage is. You're not wasting air because you're resetting the bolt, and you're preserving air that doesn't get a chance to leak out. And I think that's really important. So this looks really good. What I do is I go through and I lube all of these, and then occasionally I will go through and I will open up the regulator here, and I will go into the spring pad, and I will lube it as well, and so we'll take a look at that, and so that's your regulator, I don't intend to do an extremely detailed video, because I think that this has been done by many other people who have done a good job, but I will be focusing on specific different areas in different videos. And then here we take out the bolt, we unscrew the back here, and we go into the bolt, and inside the bolt we have the Milsid heat core O-ring, and I'll be taking that apart in just a minute. Okay, we're unscrew the back side here, get access to our bolt. And one of the things I've done is I've put some threading on here with this thread seal tape. And I don't know if it helps, but that's what I did, and I haven't ever had any problems with leaking from the back. And so then you just need to bring out your bolt, and there it just popped out really quickly. And from what you're maybe used to. I've upgraded a number of my O-rings to a Buna N, which is a nitrile type of O-ring. I believe it's a little bit better than your silicone O-rings that come stock in the TCP and the VKS. And I'll give more detail on that in the description. But these are a little bit more resistant to abrasion and damage. But this is not a moving part, so it probably really doesn't matter, but that's what I use. And because I'm using the VKS spring to reseat the bolt, I have two bumpers now. So normally this comes with one bumper, but the VKS has two bumpers, so now I have two of those. And so this is still pretty well lubed from previous use, and you just want to clean off the oil from before, and then really examine everything and just see how it looks. And so everything still looks really good on my air chamber after a year and a half. You do see some wear in here, and I don't know if that becomes an issue over time, but there is some rubbing that happens. And in here you can see you might be able to see the heat core O-ring. I don't have the overhead light on as well. It helps. But you can see that there's the black O-ring in there. You don't see the silicone O-ring. And that's the Milsig O-ring that is from Grimberg. And I usually can just take this off. Once you've dried it of oil, you can just get a good grip on this and you can pull it off. It doesn't need to be so incredibly tight. And then in here you've got another O-ring, and this is the stock O-ring. I haven't changed this one. And so those are the two pieces there. And you can see down into the air chamber. And I don't know if you can see the Milsig O-ring seated in there. This one seats into the groove so well that it might be hard to see. But that's the air chamber. And then here's my firing bolt, and there's the pin. Everything looks good. I don't see any evidence of any problems with this after this much use. And I do want to check and see if the firing pin is at all loose based on a lot of people's experience. So let's check that. So surprisingly, this is my TCP. This is not a VKS. This hasn't been shot at high levels, but it's the first time I've really checked it. But I'm finding that it's backing out. So when I touch it, it's turning, and so if that happens, I'm just going to go ahead and take this one out. I would have never imagined that this one would be loose, but I need to take it out and I need to Loctite it, and I would have never expected that for this one, because it is definitely working its way out. So let me back it out. That's the firing pin, you can see here, and the set screw. And so what we need to do is we need to Loctite the end here and then put it back in as carefully as we can, back in, and screw it back in. So that's a lesson learned. Even with the TCP, this was from a year and a half ago. Maybe it's because these are not intended to be fired at these velocities that even the TCP is firing in the 30 to 40 joule range. So this one definitely needs some attention. So we're going to take care of that on this service. Okay, I got my red Loctite, and give it a good shake. And then I apply it to the threads here. see what we can do. You just get it in there really well. I'm going to do it over the paper towel. Really saturate the threads with the red Loctite. And wipe off a little bit of excess. And then I can put it in my forceps here and very carefully lower it down into the slot. And the first time worked really well. This time, not getting it in quite as well. So let me bring it back out. Try again. So the red Loctite is on there. Of course, the time that you try to do it with the Loctite, it's a lot harder. These are not ideal. And I'm just screwing it down. I know you can't see this, but it's literally just getting it in the groove. And once it's in the groove, you're going to screw it down nice and snug till it's completely in. Give it a nice tight turn here. And okay, so that's in there, and it looks to be pretty straight now. And the only way to tell will be to test with the firing bolt and make sure that, make sure that it'll go on here just right. And it does. So I'm gonna let that set up, and that should be good to go. I'm gonna just check it one more time here. Make sure it's really snug. And so was a surprise there. I mean, I didn't expect that at all with the TCP, and so that makes me really wonder about the VKS, which I'll be checking. But so you learn something new every day. I think maybe what it's telling me is that it's not so much high-powered shots. If you do 50 joules, you might have the problem really quickly. But if you're doing the powers that we shoot these TCPs at, 20 joules, 30 joules, but over a year and a half, it may slowly unwind and unscrew and become an issue down the line. So I think that's where my year and a half of experience with the TCP comes in handy. And so I would suggest, if you're concerned about this, I would say early on, take out your pin and red Loctite it just to be safe. I was lucky it didn't happen to me in the first year and a half, but at least we figured it out. In case anyone was wondering, I recently bought a spare FSC air chamber and bolt assembly. And I thought we'd just take a quick look after going through what we just did and just compare this to the TCP. And I think one thing you'll notice is the difference in the color of the O-rings, and I think that's the one difference I was talking about earlier. But basically, myself looking at this, I don't see any differences. This is the firing bolt it's for T8.1 9.1 FSC, and in my left hand is the one for the TCP. And for all intents and purposes, I don't see any differences in the shape, the length, the size, the weight, the material. These are identical as far as I can tell. And so I believe that if you have a TCP and you need a new firing bolt, you can get a new TCP firing bolt, or you can just buy an FSC bolt. And I checked this new FSC bolt, which is brand new, and it's really tight. So take that for what it's worth, but it's good to know that you can buy these off the shelf and that they're readily available. And that's a good thing to know and keep in mind as well.